And we've got two amazing speakers that we are going to hear from. They are both from Oxford University, and based on their personal experiences, they'll be telling us about, some things that they have been able to learn along the way because they have been able to be successful in the scholarship applications. We all know that, school is not easy, and so we need a little bit of help. And yeah, we're going to start. And I hope our speakers are already here. If they are, I'm requesting them to open their cameras. Thank you. And I think Patricia can pin them so that they can be visible on the screen. Oh yeah, I can see them. All right. So we've got two speakers today, and I'm going to invite them so that they can be able to introduce themselves and, briefly tell us where they currently are, what they are doing there, and the scholarship that they are in. So I'm going to welcome Kelechi Chima, who's going to start his introduction, a brief introduction, and then to Edinah Samuel, and then we will go ahead. Welcome, Kelechi, and I hope I've pronounced your name right.
Yes, you've pronounced it right. Much better than most people do the first time without hearing it said. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Kelechi Chima. I'm a medical doctor from Nigeria, and I'm a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford. And I'm currently doing a DPhil in clinical medicine. And I've also just completed the master's in international health and tropical medicine. And yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you, Kelechi. Over to you, Edinah.
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay, amazing. So my name is Edinah Samuel, and I'm glad to be here with Kelechi to share our experience. Originally, I'm from Kenya, and I was doing a master's in water science policy and management. And my background is environmental science. That's what I did for my bachelor's, and then I did another master's in environmental planning and management from Kenya, and then off to Oxford. My scholarship is the African Oxford Initiative that is funded by the MasterCard Foundation, but I'm also funded by an alumni from Oxford who is very much interested in supporting scholars from Africa that have an interest on issues around, environment, climate change, and health related. So it's the AFOX, Lloyd and Norman Scholarship. I think the Lloyd's Bank in the UK has a contribution into the scholarship as well.
All right. Perfect. So, to you, Kelechi, probably just briefly you can tell us about your scholarship journey before we get into the personal statements, which are one of the most important things when you're applying for scholarships. And so just tell us, how did what was going through your mind when you were applying for these scholarships? Where did you start? As well as, did you have people who held your hand as you were going through the process of looking for a scholarship? Did you have everything figured out? Or you're just a young person trying to see if you're going to make it? So yeah, briefly tell us about your journey before we get into the juicy part.
Okay. Well, first things first, I didn't have everything figured out. That's for sure. So I'm currently on the Rhodes Scholarship, and just in case anyone isn't, just as a brief intro, the Rhodes Scholarship is one of the oldest international postgraduate scholarships for postgraduate study at the University of Oxford. And it's a global scholarship with just over 100 students from all parts of the world being admitted to study for a minimum of 2 to 4 years at the University of Oxford. So what that means is either 2 one-year masters, 1 2-year MPhil, a PhD, which is usually 3 to 4 years, or the pathway which I'm currently doing is 1 year master and then a 3-year PhD. So I'm a second-year Rhodes Scholar, having completed a 1-year master and then now just starting my 3-year DPhil or PhD, University of Oxford. So so I got my scholarship in late 2022 and then started at Oxford in 2023. So the scholarship is one of the earliest scholarships, so you usually get your response before you even apply to Oxford or many other schools. And then they would then fund you for the next year. So I actually got it on my second try, which I think I'm always quick to point out. The first time I applied, I got to the online stage, but I didn't go beyond that. And the Rhodes Scholarship is, you only apply twice and then never again, at least in my constituency, the West African constituency. And so when I applied the first time and I didn't get in, and there's an age limit as well. So I was still within the age limit, right? But for some reason, I just decided to apply the next year immediately. But I was, quite uncertain about whether if I had changed enough, whether I'd achieved more things, and then whether if I would get it the second time around. But I thought if I wasn't going to get it that time, I probably wouldn't apply again. So I then applied for that, and luckily, the rest is history. I think in terms of my journey and what kind of facilitated the process, I heard about the scholarship from a friend, and then I, consumed all the information I could online from the website, from all their social media channels. And I think that's one thing I usually highlight a lot is you need to understand the spirit of the scholarship. What kind of people are they looking for? And that helps you think through your own career and find points, that match with what they're looking for. And it also feeds into your personal statement and then other essays down the line if essays are required. So after doing that, I kind of had a good picture of what I was applying for, and then I reached out to some past winners as well, and then finalists, just to get any advice I could. I think for my first round, I don't think I successfully got through to any past winner. So yeah, so that was that. I just put in my application, and then I had good relationships with my professors, and then also professional relationships with people I was working with. And I think that's something that's usually lost in translation, because people speak about how getting reference letters can be one of the most difficult parts of getting a scholarship, of applying for a scholarship rather. But having a good relationship with your professors and then other such individuals who are invested not only in the scholarship you're trying to get, but in you, because you'll face rejection and then you still have to go back to them. So I developed that relationship with professors and told them, I'm applying for many things, and I would really appreciate some repeated reference letters. And so a lot of them were the same people that still wrote my reference letters the second time around. And then one of them linked me up with a previous winner in a different different constituency, and just sort of gave me some general advice and helped me believe in myself for that second round. And then I put in the application, and went through the whole online interview, finalist interview, and then made it through. And I think if there's any other thing you'd want me to highlight specifically about my journey. But I think that's pretty much my story.
Thank you, Kelechi. I mean, one of the I mean, from your journey, we can, what I'm getting is that you did not have everything figured out. You just started. And I think, I mean, I, as a prospective student, sometimes my biggest worry is maybe I need everything figured out. Maybe I should have done this and this and this. But then listening and hearing from you, it's a journey. It's a journey, one that someone has to hold your hand, I believe. I've talked to a couple of students who have been able to get scholarships, and two things that they have mentioned, and that is the same with you, is number one, knowing someone who has been able to get in the school that you want to, or get into the scholarship that they are eyeing for. And I think that is I believe they are the best people to guide you. And that is why we are here in this session. I believe there are people who probably want to get to Oxford University, or even be a Rhodes Scholar. And thank you for sharing that. To you, Edinah, what was your journey? Did you have everything figured out? How did you start? And I mean, did you have someone hold your hand? And what was the journey for you emotionally and mentally?
Thank you so much, Wamaitha. I think my stories are a little bit different from Kelechi, who tried the second time. For me, it was a last minute decision that I'm applying to Oxford. I had no idea what scholarships are available. That's one thing. And when I decided to do this application, it was 2 weeks to the deadline. So that was in December. And the deadline to apply to Oxford normally closes on the 15th of January. I made the last decision because initially I had wanted to, from my, the previous master's program that I was in, and then I was working with a research organization. So I wanted to transition myself into a PhD program, but I never had time because my work entailed traveling a lot. And anytime I'm back to Kenya, I'm back in a year, I'm back in a month, and then I'm so exhausted, I don't really have time to sit down and think about what do I want for a PhD? Can I have time to draft a very good proposal and look for these scholarships? It was December and I decided to resign from my organization for other purposes. And I decided to do my application to Oxford. But how did I learn about this water science policy program? I was working with one professor in 2021 from Johns Hopkins. We did some work in Kenya, and he just mentioned to me, why don't you apply to the water science policy program in Oxford? I can actually support you do the application. Oh, I said, I'm going to apply, but it's just the idea of, yes, I'm going to apply, but you're not very sure when this will happen. So, and then subsequently in my organization, we were doing this study that was funded by USAID, looking at issues around water quality and water safety within the rural context. And during that time, I was in Uganda. I was never really a water quality expert, because my background was more environmental related and I wasn't very much interested in water. But when I was there, one of the professors, I kind of got interested to learn more about why are we even doing all these water quality assessments, collecting data from communities. One of the professors from Oxford posted a paper and then she just highlighted, I'll just quote, she was traveling and because of the jet lag, she decided to write a paper that is asking, should we do more water quality testing? How are we going to handle the data? I read the paper and I felt like it's quite interesting. I started following her. And then following back to the work that she does, I realized they have been doing this, water security assessment research study for 10 years in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Bangladesh. And then it was a program funded by the UK department. And then I kind of resonated that with the program that I was doing, funded by USAID, which was a very big grant. And then I realized it seems the water sector is very much interested on issues around water safety and drinking water supply. So when I checked, she was the course coordinator for the water science policy program. So in those 2 weeks, I sat down, drafted my application. I was essentially sleeping and waking up on my application. I write, I sleep, I come back, continue, and drafting my application. And one of the requirements was you need to write an essay, and then you need to write a personal statement, and of course the academic credentials. So I submitted. There was only one scholarship that I actually knew about. And when you're doing your application into the program, you can select that scholarship. Because of the late application that I was doing, there were not so many scholarships that were open by that time. And then I also inquired from someone who was an alumni doing the same program, and we tried checking. And then she was like, yeah, that's the only scholarship that is available. I tried doing the application. Eventually, I didn't even get that scholarship. I don't know. What I usually say is Oxford has a way of, except the Rhodes Scholar, for most of the other scholarships, it's you need to apply, get the admission letter, and once you get in, then you can be shortlisted for a number of scholarships. I had no idea about that. So the day I got an admission, even before I could see my email for admission, I received one email from the African Oxford Initiative that I've been shortlisted for this scholarship. And the process entailed, of course, preparing more documents on why you need that scholarship and why you need to be awarded. And then I was also shortlisted for the Oxford Cambridge Society scholarship, normally funded from the UK department in Kenya, and they support one student in Oxford, one student in Cambridge. So I prepared for all those. I did my interviews, and I got both of them, but I declined the Oxford Cambridge Society scholarship. And that's one of the things I would point out right now is when you get admitted to an institution and do several interviews, if you get more than one scholarship, kindly evaluate and see what are the benefits, what are you getting from the two scholarships, and then make a decision. Because in most situations, and Kelechi can confirm this, is most people would get two scholarships, and then the first one that confirms that you have gotten the scholarship, you're so much excited, you just accept it. And then the second one comes, and then when you come here, you are regretting why you never accepted the second scholarship, because it essentially provides more benefits compared to the other one. So that's my story of, it was a last minute rush. And during this process, just to say that I had won a number of fellowships when I was doing my first master's program, and then getting myself to do research with an international research organization. I was a bit familiar with writing and drafting these applications, but I was very strategic on who was reviewing my application, and that is, I figured and I gave out to two professors reviewed my applications and people who had PhDs. And these are people that have worked with before. And the first time I actually drafted my application and gave it to the professor from John Hopkins, he just thrashed out my work. I had to have the resilience and start again because I only had a few days to submit. Otherwise, the deadline would have gone. Along the way, it was emotionally draining. At some point, I felt, why am I even, struggling to just do this application? I'm not even sleeping at night. I'm sleeping a few hours and then I have to wake up and continue working on my application. But then I just told myself, just keep going. Maybe you're going to get it. So that's essentially my whole story of how I got here. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, what I'm getting from you is that you had to reach out to many people, and it wasn't an easy journey, especially because of the last minute trying to rush everything. And so, I mean, that's quite a journey. And so we're going to get inside the personal statements because this is one of the very important things when one is applying from scholarship. Of course, there are other things, but the personal statement is one that helps the school or even the scholarship the scholarship type get to know you on a personal level, and that is why they usually ask for it to see if they align with the values of the scholarships, the values of the school, get to know what you bring into the table and how and why it's important for them to give you that scholarship. And so I'm gonna start with you, Edna, and what are the key things based on your experience both while looking for scholarships or even other fellowship opportunities that you've mentioned that you're able to get into? What are the key things that one needs to consider when writing their personal statements or their personal essays?
Thank you so much, Wamaitha. I think from my personal experience, I would say everybody's story is very different. Can you curate your story in a way that someone can envision who you are even when they don't know you? And I think like one of the big things that I usually do, and because we come from sub-Saharan Africa, and when we talk about sustainable development goals, I mean, I'm in environment, so we have to talk about sustainable development goals. When you look at the statistics, sub-Saharan Africa is usually lagging behind in most of these statistics. So I kind of use the vulnerability context to explain what is the situation that I'm interested in terms of, issues around water. For me, because of where I come from, I was very much interested on issues around water, climate change, and health. So I was kind of curating my story around that, but also understanding where are the vulnerability pain points that I can actually highlight and curate that to my personal story from my experience. And that's my personal story started from the way I was brought up, giving a story of how we used to wake up very early in the morning, go to collect water at 6 or 5 o'clock in the morning before you go to school. And I come from a very mountainous region in Kenya, and I never thought we actually had water issues. And then I talked about how I have had an experience of learning more on water quality and what that one means in the context of where I come from. So that's one. And then I also resonated that story. So that's how I was brought up. But I also resonated that story to how did I get myself to work in research as a woman? Because we don't have a lot of, women working in science from sub-Saharan Africa. The statistics are quite minimal. So I curated my story as a woman from sub-Saharan Africa, but I also into the experience that I've had working with marginalized communities. I've worked in South Sudan, I've worked in Somalia, I've worked in Ethiopia, and working with very marginalized communities. And when we think about the statistics and talk about climate change, the Horn of Africa largely is the most affected region globally in terms of climate change. So I curated that story from the way I was brought up, these water issues, and what I'm seeing now in terms of climate change back home. And one of the examples that I actually gave was I went back to the village. I couldn't believe that, these rivers where we used to go to collect water during the dry season, they're drying up. And now we have those long queues of women waiting to collect water. And this is something that I never imagined. Then I curated that to me working with marginalized communities in very remote setups and what are the challenges they face. And then, I culminated that into why do I want to apply to the water program? What strengths am I bringing in? And what am I going to gain from that? And what impact am I actually going to create? So that's how I curated my story. And I usually say everybody's story is very different, but it depends on how do you piece all these different, how do you bring the different dimensions and piece them together to have a value? And someone can envision this is actually who you are, even without them knowing you. Back to you.
Okay, so vulnerability, personal experiences, and also the communities that you have been able to interact with, and link all that so that whoever is going to read your essay gets a picture of who you are and the work that you're doing and how important it is in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you. What about you,
I can also
Kelechi?
just add one more thing as Kelechi comes in. Sorry, Kelechi, is one of the things that I've always learned is when you're doing your application, including statistics, include a bit of one or two statistics makes more sense for people to understand of where you're coming from. Kelechi, back to you. Sorry.
I think that's very, very valuable advice. I think when it comes to a personal statement, for one thing, every personal statement is different, right? You don't write one personal statement for all your applications. And, as I talk a bit more, it become clearer as to just, why. So the first part of the personal statement is there's a lot of deep introspection, right? Of your experiences of your career thus far. Um, and one thing I say is you can't tell your story if you don't know it, right? So you need to think very carefully about every stage of your life and every experience you've had, what you've learned in terms of the skills and who you've interacted with. But more importantly, is how those experiences have shaped who you are currently and your interests. And this goes beyond saying, since I was 8 years old, I've always wanted to help people, or since I was, ever since I was a child, it needs to be a bit deeper than that. Not, because some of those explanations are quite shallow, right? So when you go deeper into the next level of how the experiences have built on each other and made you into the kind of person that you are, the next step is how have you demonstrated those interests, right? So something happened to you and that made you interested in health, for example. Okay, fine. How have you demonstrated that interest in health? What internships have you done? What experiences have you gained? What skills? What positions have you taken up? So it's not just to say you're passionate about something. You're passionate about something based on these experiences, right? And then you have demonstrated that passion quantitatively in so and so fields. And that has led you towards this particular application, right? So after that deep kind of open-ended introspection, the next step for me is usually then x-raying those experiences with the lens of that particular application, right? So it's like if you're applying to a scholarship, that scholarship has like published values, like they have what is important to them. So you having, having gained the knowledge of your career thus far and all those experiences, you can then you know, look through the lens of that scholarship. Okay, they value leadership, they value this, they value that. What matters most to them, and which aspects of my career have really brought those things to light, And then when you've juxtaposed your career with the values, you can then start seeing, you can then start drawing correlations between those two. And then those then form like little pockets that you string along in your application. And I use that stringing along analogy carefully because it has to be cohesive, right? It has to be very clear. And there are some things I tell people. It's that we are very complex human beings. We have very varied interests. Just because I'm a medical doctor doesn't mean I don't have interest in, I don't know, art, graphic designing, or so many other different aspects. But for an application, you have to collapse yourself into a very focused and a very defined aspect of yourself, and that's where, looking through the lens of the particular scholarship matters. And that's why you cannot have the same personal statement for more than one application, right? You can build off, the building blocks because your experiences don't change essentially, but the way you look at the experience. For example, if you in your undergraduate institution, you're a leader, right? That might matter for a scholarship is, how you led, what activities you did, and, how that really taught you what it means to be a leader and whatnot. But that might not matter so much to an application, to a school directly. In that case, if you're a leader of like a research organization, what matters is the skills you gained, you publish certain papers as a leader, you worked with so individuals, you learned how to work in a team, what, right? So it's the same experience, but it's just highlighting different aspects of those things for a particular application. And I'm just picking up what Edinah said as well. Quantify, quantify. If, for example, and I'm, forgive me if my bias is leaning towards the medical aspect. If you, for example, like led outreaches, right, in your local community, you don't just say you led outreaches. How many people were at the outreach? How many people did you reach? Did you reach them physically, virtually? What was the activities involved in the outreach? Quantify, quantify, quantify. And that really helps someone to understand your impact, because you might have some very important experiences, but you cannot quantify the impact. And so it's more or less meaningless to somebody who's not from your context. So just to summarize, one, the main thing for me is cohesiveness. Where have you been, or what have you done? What are you currently doing, and what do you hope to do in the future? That's one framework you can use. What are the experiences that have occurred along that pathway? And what have you learned in those experiences? Who have you interacted with? Then what does this application require of me? What are they looking for on paper? And what aspects of those experiences have provided those things that they're looking for, either directly to a master, to an educational program, or to a scholarship?
Wow, I think what I've really loved about your explanation is on the deep introspection aspect and how it's important in bringing the personal you and really explaining who you are. You've brought out the past, the current, and the past, present, and the future. Your experiences, what you've been doing, and why. What you've been doing, how important the scholarship is to be able to take you to your goals and where you want to be. So thank you. Briefly, to both Kelechi and Edinah, would you mind telling us your story and how you brought it out in your scholarship applications? Does it make sense? Does the question make sense? Your personal journeys and how you brought that out in your scholarship applications.
Yeah, I think I can so the roads, okay, so maybe a bit more about my background. So in medical school, I was very much interested in kind of activities or interventions that went beyond one patient at a time, right? So I was very infatuated with the idea that, a simple solution could really affect the whole generation. And one thing I always cite, if you will indulge me, is, when there was the river blindness, kind of, I wouldn't say an epidemic, but river blindness was a major burden. And then ivermectin was kind of like this miracle drug, sort of, but the drug has to be administered to at a particular weight, right? And then you didn't have scales, in a lot of poor countries. So what they used was like a stick, and the stick checks the height. So it's just notched. So if this person reaches this notch, they get 1 dose and 2 doses. So that's on a tangent, but just something as simple as a stick, really helped with the river blindness issues. And those things kind of like inspired me to participate in lots of outreaches, and things like that. So in my undergraduate program, I became the leader or president of kind of an undergraduate research and humanitarian organization, led multiple outreaches in southeastern Nigeria, focused on non-communicable diseases, and reaching like thousands of individuals. And and that was one of my major experiences. And then other than that, I was involved in research, particularly HIV self-testing amongst young people in Nigeria. And I led a pilot with my team, to kind of pilot a novel mobile technology, low tech mobile technology that was, feasible in low resource settings. And information from that was kind of incorporated into that RCT and whatnot, and other things like that. So just to be brief, so during my undergraduate, I was involved in both research and humanitarian organizations, right? In leadership positions. And And those things, kind of shaped my idea of what I wanted to do and kind of informed the fact that I knew some things, but I didn't know enough. So I needed to know more in particular areas, particularly global health, public health. What exactly are these interventions and how exactly can they help people on a larger scale? And that's why I knew that a master's rather than specialty training was my next course of action. So the Rhodes Scholarship has very specific values, right? And they're very clear about it, like four values. One of them is leadership, dedication to service, leadership, dedication to service, commitment to the weak, and educational excellence, essentially. So, I mean, in terms of educational excellence, it's your performance in schools, in your school, and and doing very well in school, essentially. But the personal statement really speaks to those other three values. And in my case, leadership, of course, I highlighted the fact that I was, a leader in a undergraduate institution and what I learned from that and what leadership meant to me. And then, my service, commitment to service. During my internship in the hospital, I also created or founded an organization that was focused on individuals battling cancer, particularly breast cancer. And then we had support groups and things like that. And so those experiences kind of spoke to my commitment, to my dedication to service, and also protecting the weak. And those things kind of pieced together into my personal statement. And one thing I just wanted to highlight is that so those are kind of the core building blocks. So I kind of identified that, okay, fine, I led a research organization and I had a certain level of impact in this particular area. Then I also, piloted HIV or public health intervention on a large scale. And then also I was leader of this non-governmental organization focused on people battling cancer. So I kind of find, okay, fine, those are my building blocks, right? Those are the things that kind of distinguish me from other people. And there are lots of layers to those experiences that I can pull on. So for the Rhodes Scholarship specifically, I just picked each of those values one by one and drew out the experiences from those building blocks that kind of fit neatly into those different values and constructed them into a personal statement. And so I think that's essentially what I did.
Thank you for bringing in the whole picture, and at least we've been able to know you. And before Edinah continues, I'd like to let our audience know that you can type in the questions that you might be having on the chat box, so that when you get to the Q&A session, our speakers, I believe, will try their best based on their experiences to give some sort of answers. So feel free to ask the questions and we'll get back to you during this session. And also Kelechi has answered the question on, the things that make an application stand out from having building blocks in your application, the things that are making your story unique, as well as showing the action and the impact that you have made in your community. So what about you, Edinah? What's your personal story, and how did it influence your educational journey and your application to the different scholarships and fellowships that you have been, just on a general scale?
I think I was laughing when Kelechi was saying when he was doing his undergraduate and how he was involved in this leadership. Personally, I think I was brought up and I was talking, this to someone else and saying, I was brought up very much in the village and studied in the village. And then even during high school, I actually schooled in the village. And then during my undergraduate, I didn't go to an institution that was like in the big cities. It was quite in a remote setup. And then, when you're growing up, one of the conversations we used to have is just as girls, we used to come together and then people say, I actually don't need to work hard. when I finish, I will get married to someone who owns a car and life will be good. That's just like this conversation that goes on because of the environment that you're brought up. But then when I finished my undergraduate and now I went back to Nairobi, and that's now when the reality hits you of, people are achieving a lot in life. You actually need to rethink about yourself and the values and what you need in life. That's when I actually kind of rethought about myself and what do I really need and where do I want to be. So my story comes back from, after doing my undergraduate, I really wanted to go for a master's program, and I tried doing applications to get a scholarship and go out of the country at that period, but I never got any. And now I can say the reason is how I used to draft my applications. They were not the best. I never had people who were actually guiding me. And growing up, I never had a mentor or anybody that I could look up to and, like set my standards way at the beginning. So I didn't get one, but then I had a chance of going, and I had my siblings in school. So my parents were really not in a position to pay for my master's program, but I got myself in. I got like a very short, research assistant position. I was doing field work. And then when I got that money, I just applied for my master's in KU and I paid for the first semester. And then I said, I don't know where this money is going to come from. As long as I've just gotten in, I've started my master's, things will just align themselves. But I got in and really got myself into, hard working and trying to apply for other opportunities. And then I realized once you actually enroll for a master's program in your country, there are more opportunities just beyond, going out of the country to do a scholarship. There are fellowship opportunities, there are summer school opportunities. So then I capitalized myself into applying for those as well. And trust me, when I was finishing my first semester, I got a 6 month fellowship to Switzerland. But it comes with, this aspect of, as Kelechi said, is I had to, focus on what I needed in life and where I wanted to be. And during that period, I could finish my classes, go to the library, work until 10, but I'm also trying to do all these applications. So going to Switzerland, it was my first time in even getting out of the country. And I was thrown into a research organization with 15,000 researchers who are doing their research on issues around water from every angle or aspect you would think about. There are various types. There's a department for all the engineers who are trying to understand issues around water. You go to health, you go to climate change, you go to psychology, name it. And then there was just one African who was Kenyan, and she was doing a PhD there. The culture shock is real when you get out of the country the first time. And then I was asking myself, what did I actually come to do here? Why did I even apply for this fellowship? So it was challenging for me to get myself to understand the work culture, get to know what I'm expected to do. But the Kenyan who was doing her PhD then was amazing. She really mentored me, and she's my mentor to date. So she mentored me, and then I was exposed to, issues around research. And I said, I'm going back to Kenya after my 6 months, but I think I would want to experience, working with research organizations back in Kenya and get myself into, doing science. So 1 month into me finishing my fellowship, I actually just checked online and I wanted to work within the international development sector. I identified all these NGOs in Kenya, and I was just sending emails. I'm saying, hey, my name is so and so. I'm finishing my fellowship. I'm doing a master's in this, and I'm looking for an internship. And then one time I joined one of the professional groups for, water professionals globally. They had created a new group. And then one of the, the people that were managing that group said, hey, welcome this organization from Kenya. I was very curious. I've never heard about that organization. I went to their website. I checked, I sent them an email. I said, I'm actually looking for an internship. They responded and said, we have these fellowships for master's and PhD students. Back then, it was Kenya, but now they have expanded to other countries in Africa. And then they said when the application will be open in a month's time. When it's open, we'll share and you can do the application. One of my cousins, who is she was teaching in a university then, when the application was out, she shared the same application to me. And then I asked myself, I mean, most people have seen this application, so I really need to draft my application very well to be competitive. They only need two people and they need either PhDs or masters. So you need to be very competitive with the application. So I spent time drafting my application, submitted, and I got the fellowship, which now exposed me to the research environment. And then at some point, I started traveling and getting more exposure, understanding why we are doing research, understanding, and again, when you travel a lot, you have the dynamics of what's happening in other countries, just beyond where you were brought up in the Kenyan context. So I think from my process of applying to the water science and the policy program here comes from the first fellowship that I got to Switzerland. That's how I got myself working in the water sector, because I got a fellowship to a water research institute. And then coming back to Kenya, I got my second fellowship with a research institute that was entirely working on water. And then along the way, I got a few other, fellowships. Like one, I was sponsored to be a young water professional from Africa. There was another program that was sponsoring 6 young water professionals globally. And it's also like, an application process that you have to go through, same as how we do the applications for master's programs. So I think that one kind of curated my story to understand the dimensions and issues around water. And then you bring in climate change, because that's one of the big conversations we are having currently. But in my organization, I was also thought about, you need to do an assessment and understand your sector and think about, where are we moving into in the next 5 years? What are we going to talk about? A good example is before 2015, people were much into issues around water supply. We never thought about sanitation, toilets, community-led total sanitation, and whatever. And then after 2015, internationally, there was a greater focus on sanitation beyond water. That's one of the examples the founders of the organization gave us. So I kind of used that strategy to analyze and see institutions like the UN, the World Health Organization, that are very big in, funding and making these decisions and providing directions of where we're moving into. So I kind of try to do that. But when I do my application, I tailor it to what are the current issues that we are struggling with and where are we potentially moving into. So my personal statement was more into, this is my experience. When I got to Switzerland, I had this fellowship, but I actually had no idea about research and science. And as a woman coming from Africa, I went back to Kenya, wanted to get more experience. And then interacting with the women in vulnerable communities, this is what these are the challenges that they are facing. And I keep wondering, I think one of the big statements I would actually say that I used in my personal statement was, I asked myself, I've been doing research. I had worked for 4 years before I came to Oxford, and I was doing pure research on, science. And I asked myself this question of, there's a very big disconnect when we do science and then the policies and then the management side. We don't bring all these things together, especially in the water sector. And one statement that I actually put in my personal statement was, if water had a voice, what would they actually ask us? Because I've been doing research for 4 years, but what impact am I creating? So I kind of curated the story of the gaps that I'm seeing from science to the policy to the management and why we are not making progress, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And as Kelechi said, know what the institutions want. Oxford is, they're very much interested in science and research and leadership. So if you curate your story also around that, that would give you some additional, competition compared to, the people that are also doing the applications to a similar program. So it's identifying those gaps, but I also, as I said before, was my upbringing and the issues that I'm seeing and bringing them to climate change. And then from my workplace, I curated that, brought in climate change, water scarcity issues, women vulnerability. And the one thing that I also mentioned was the achievements that I've had. I did one big study in Kenya, which raised more than 10,000 US dollars to support one of the organizations. I'm not going to mention the names here, but it's like a very big, one of the big organizations globally to support issues around water access and women in Africa. So I kind of mentioned something like that, and then I had led a number of fieldwork related activities where I train research assistants, I manage programs. I just curated, as this is comes back to what Kelechi said, the skills that you have. So, in the cohesion of bringing everything back to the direction that you think they will be interested to hear. But also one last thing that I did was Oxford has been doing this program in Kenya. I purposely mentioned the impact that they have created, but also identified a gap of what needs to be done. But I also said, I don't think I have a solution, even if I come, I'll be coming to do a master's program. I don't think we'll be able to find a solution, but I'm happy to engage myself with other researchers and professors in Oxford, who are doing amazing stuff outside here. That's my story. Back to you.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing your story. And what I'm getting from you is, number one, you really need to know the angle that you're applying for, and the particular program, the particular course that you're applying for. Identify the gaps that are there. Show what you have been able to do so far in your country's context, and also do research in terms of, for example, if you're applying to Oxford or any other university, and for the different scholarships, you really, really, really have to read and do research and see what is there globally for you to bring out the best in your personal statements. So if we are coming to the end of this session, and so we are going to go to the Q&A, the last part probably of the Q&A session. And in our chat, we've been able to have a couple of questions. And this is to you, Kelechi, because you are in the Rhodes Scholarship. I think Glory is asking whether you use the same Rhodes personal statement for the admission. Is it the same for that? Based on what I'm understanding, the personal statement, is it the same for whatever you apply to get to Oxford? Is it the same to get into the scholarship?
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's a very good question. It wasn't the same. So yeah, so my application was to the Masters in International Health and Tropical Medicine. Very different, because they have specific values, even though, there's no problem with leadership or other things. It's like they have very specific academic, requirements. And so, just to be a bit more practical, it was highlighting my experience with piloting the the program for HIV self-testing in Nigeria was more important to them, obviously, because that's more of the focus of international health, tropical medicine, and things like that. So highlighting the skills and the experience of that, was took up a larger proportion of my personal statement. Yeah, so it was very different. If you submit the same personal statement for more than one thing, then you're probably doing something wrong, because there will always be differences and subtle differences in what they're looking for. So, and you could always tweak a sentence here, highlight an experience there to change a personal statement. But there's nothing, but you don't have to start from scratch for each personal statement, because you'll be writing a lot. So you could always have the same building blocks and story, but you tweak them to the specific application.
Thank you, Kelechi. And the other question we have is Tegawende Breeze, who is a scholar from Burkina Faso and currently pursuing a master's in development economics as an AFL scholar in France, and has previously completed an undergraduate degree in economics as a CSE scholar. He's saying, as I prepare my application for the MasterCard scholarship at Oxford for a master's in global governance and diplomacy, his first question is, my undergraduate GPA is significantly higher than my graduate grades due to the differences in grading systems in France, should I submit my undergraduate GPA, or would my master's grade be competitive enough for the application? And also the second question is, would having already completed a master's degree give me a competitive advantage in the selection process? So I think this is a question to you, Edinah. You can try, doing your best to give an answer.
Kelechi will also jump into this as well based on your experience in Oxford. Let me start with having a master's program. Having a master's degree, is it going to give you a competitive advantage? Absolutely no. Everybody is gambling for the application to get an admission to Oxford. Remember, the admission is one thing that you need to gamble and get in, and then you need to gamble yourself to get a scholarship. That's away from the Rhodes Scholarship, because for them, they get the scholarship and then they get into Oxford. So that's one. Two, so I think it's the thing of the way I usually do when I'm doing an application. What I usually imagine is how many people are applying for this scholarship. If I'm applying for a program that is targeting Africa, I ask myself this question. We have 54, 55 countries in Africa. How many people will be applying? So think about it that way, because you need to get an admission and everybody wants that admission. You are not the only one. Other people also have their first class from the undergraduate, and people are coming from different education grading systems. So I think it's really about how do you curate your story, and how convincing is it, and how aligned is it with what Kelechi just said? Is it aligned to the program that you're applying to? Can someone envision and see, understand what you're talking about in your personal statement, in your essay? Two, about the grading system, I think there's a way you can convert the grading system into the UK. So potentially, if you can submit if you submit or mention on your resume that you're doing a master's program, then they would expect to see your transcripts. But if you don't mention, then you need to align your documents and just leave out the master's program. But I would honestly say sometimes it's just good to mention you're doing another master's program. Why should you shy away from that? Just include all your transcripts, both from undergraduate and even in Oxford. When I did my application and then I was admitted and I got the scholarship, they had to request me to send my transcripts to the UK for them to verify. And I had to send all of them, both my master's and for my undergraduate. Did I answer the question? So there's no competitive advantage for you. You're having a master's. People are coming from different parts of the world, and people have achieved things. I'm telling you, when you get to Oxford and then you hear what people have achieved, and then you just like, I think the first time when I was here, I used to keep quiet. I thought I had achieved it when I got to Oxford, but then when you get in and speak to people, you just keep quiet. That's absolutely my experience. Kelechi, you can jump in on this.
Yeah, I think so you're applying for a master's in global governance and diplomacy. I don't see why you shouldn't include your first master's. Yeah, I don't see why you shouldn't include it. You certainly learned things in that master's that would make you a better candidate for a master's in global governance and diplomacy. So there's something, so instead of focusing so much on the grades, I think you should really look at what did you learn from the master's that makes you better suited for a master's in global governance and diplomacy. And it's part of your trajectory. It's like there's probably a reason why you want the master's in global governance and diplomacy. And if you think critically, part of that reason might even be from the master's that you studied. So it's still part of your whole pathway, and that's part of who you are. So yeah, I think that's my own personal take on it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And so thank you for giving us your insights. Also, we have Joanna is asking the Oxford program I'm applying for, MSc Law and Finance, has a 300-word limit for the personal statement. It is incredibly difficult to fit everything that feels important and effectively tells my story in only 300 words. How would you recommend telling a compelling story in a 300-word personal statement and optimize it for an AFOX scholarship as well? Considering that to be selected for an AFOX scholarship, the committee will be looking at these same documents. I mean, that's a question to you both.
Yeah, I think one of the difficult things is condensing things into a one-page document or a half or two paragraphs. That's the most difficult thing that I've learned to do it in Oxford. I never thought I would actually do it. But the process of drafting your applications, you usually don't start with a very perfect personal statement. You never start with a very perfect essay. You write as many ideas as you would think, and then you do a lot of, personally, the way I would do it is I would write wherever that I'm thinking at that time. You know, sometimes the way we think is you translate what you're thinking in your local language into English. That's the first thing that comes into your mind when you're drafting something the first time. I would write whatever I'm thinking in my head. Those are my ideas. But then I would go into the second round and start drafting, you know, making cleaner versions of the document. At the same time, I will be reading. It really entails a lot of reading. You just don't draft things from your head and that's it. You have to read and see what's outside here. What are people talking about? I follow people on LinkedIn. I would even say I would follow someone and see, oh, this professor said something about this. And then I would be like, I think I want to curate my story and mention something. I would put it there. At the end of the day, you'll be having so many versions. Sometimes you have to delete some things and then you'll be like, actually, this one doesn't make sense. This one makes sense. So that's one. You'll have to start with a 5-page document, come down to 4-3. It's really a process before you get to the first to a 1-page document, and then you scale it down to 300 words. Scaling down things is the most difficult one ever you would think about to everybody, but it's a process of you need to start from something that is, it's not really like a good document. It's not a well-structured document, but keep reading so that you develop the direction of where you want yourself to be. With the AFOX scholarship, I think this year they changed a little bit. I don't remember, but with AFOX as well, we were doing, when I was applying to my master's program, I did a personal statement of either 700 or 1,000 words, I think 700 or 500. And then with AFOX, you also need to do a 250. I think it was 250 or 150. They had 3 questions. So you had to write in each question. And I mean, Patricia can also remember this, but it was maybe 150 or 250 around there, or 300, why you need this scholarship and what impact you're going to create. So it's also a process of you need to scale down things. You know, you need to scale them down into those words. So I would say allow yourself to be messy, write whatever ideas that you have, but also the people who are going to review your application will really guide you. Be strategic on who, you know, people that are so brutal with giving up, who can review your work and give you brutal feedback rather than someone who just doesn't give you a very honest feedback that is very detailed, and that one would guide you on how you can scale down, on how you can scale down your application. To try to also watch a number of YouTube videos. I mean, we learn from YouTube, you know. When you come here, you're not going to ask all the time you want to inquire about this, about this. There's a lot that we can learn from social media rather than just using social media for social purposes. It's also a learning, it's a learning platform that you can get in and see how people have navigated and produced shorter documents. Back to you, Kelechi.
Yeah, I think that's it's quite comprehensive. Um, yeah, I think I would just say a perfect first draft, is a completed first draft. You just have to vomit something out, take like a day away and then come back and keep working on it. And the more you work on it and the more you really understand what aspects are really important, the more you'll be able to fine tune that and have a very concise thing. And what exactly are they asking for? Right? Like, what exactly is the MSc Law and Finance asking for? What are their recruiters looking at? Are there question prompts, or is it just tell us a 300-word limit, personal statement? If there are no prompts, look through the whole course website, look through everything, watch everything you can to kind of understand what they're looking for, and then you will then know what really needs to be included in those 300 words. Yeah, I think that's my 2 cents.
And then I can also mention one other thing is, as Kelechi said, if they have given you an outline of what to include in a personal statement, the way we usually do initially was, we used to be told stories when you're writing a poem or something. You start with stories before you get to the main point. Try to go to the main point, exactly what they have asked, and don't collect everything into a basket, but just try to be very objective and specific.
Okay, thank you. And we have a couple of people who have raised their hands. So I cannot see them from my end, but I hope Patricia can. And she can be able to unmute them and they can go ahead and ask their questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laureen, Kelechi, and Edinah. So we just have 2 more questions. Thank you for staying put. So the first one is by Joanna Kahum. So Joanna, you can just unmute, then shoot your 2 questions. Then we go to Ola. Okay, I'll pronounce that name better next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, and thanks, Kelechi and Edna, for your responses to my question. I just wanted to build on the question because, Edna, you mentioned that in the previous year, to apply for the AFOC scholarship, you had to write a separate essay, but unfortunately, that's not the case this year. So your Oxford application will serve as your AFOC's application. And so for the personal statement specifically, I think that will be the document that will highlight why, as an African scholar, I should be considered for the AFOC scholarship. But it's only 300 words, and I don't know how to make it such that it's good for Oxford, because what the Oxford prompt for the personal statement is very generic. So what's your motivation, blah, blah, blah. So not very specific. But now for AFOX, I was trying to think, what can I include in this personal statement that'll show that I fit with their values. So like, I don't know how much weight to give to both, because it's a very short statement and there'll be no secondary opportunity for me to pitch myself to AFOC. So I was just wondering, how do I strike that balance in my personal statement very effectively? Should I state the values of AFOCs and how I align with them? Like, how do I go about positioning myself as an ideal African scholar?
So if we go back to our personal stories and how we said about our journey, we didn't just focus about why we need the scholarship. It's really about, where am I coming from? What skills do I have? I think Kelechi summarized it very well. What is your past? What is your present? And where do you want to see yourself in the future? But also remember, the first people that are going to see your application is the department that you are applying to, before even AFOX could review you and, they could review your application to be shortlisted for the scholarship. So one thing is, I would try to balance everything out. It's actually not difficult it's difficult, but when you learn how to do it, that's when you will learn that you can actually do a 300 essay or personal statement. And you include everything. It's the same as someone would tell you, can you give me a 1-page CV? For some reason, you have to make it a 1-page CV and think of, what do I need to include and what is it that I don't need to include? So having the first, I think about it this way. This is my personal story. Can I summarize it in 2 or 3 sentences? This is my skills that I have. Is it going to be 2 sentences? This is where I am going. Is it going to be 3 sentences? And this is going to be very different for everybody. And then think about, why are you applying for that program? what skills are you bringing in, so that, and as Kelechi said, the cohesiveness of your story. If I follow your story, is it cohesive? So this is me, this is my skills, this is what I've been doing, this is my background, this is what I've been doing, this is why I'm applying for this program, this is what I'm bringing in, and this is what I'm envisioning. And then remember, in the same application, why do I need a scholarship? Then I will have to mention something about it, because AFOX is entirely, interested in capacity building scholars from Africa. Then think about it in a way like, what impact am I going to create in terms of supporting some of the values that AFOX is looking into, especially in the African continent. But then another thing that I usually do, even in my all applications that I do, is I start from either I would do like a very global perspective and then drain down to Africa, or I would mention something about Africa and then, link it to something that is global, so that you just don't limit yourself and say, oh, I'm actually thinking just about Africa, but also think, and it's very dependent. It depends with the program as well. But I'm talking from my experience, and especially people that are doing environmental related programs, because this is something very global. So that's how I would think about it. And also another thing is, watch YouTube videos of scholars who have been accepted to high-level institutions like Oxford. People share their experiences on how they were writing their personal statements. It can also give you ideas.
Yeah, and
Kelechi,
yeah, thanks. I just wanted to clarify. I mean, I'm not an AFOC scholar, but is it the case that everyone who receives an offer gets invited to an interview? Is that correct? So your primary objective now is to get the offer, isn't it? Before we even talk about like AFOX. So
I think, yeah, Kelechi, how things have changed now is the one application that you do to Oxford to get an admission. Once you get an admission, AFOX is going to review. I mean, I think they do this automatic acceptance of all the AFOX scholars, then they get shortlisted. And not everybody, let me say, because I knew a few other individuals who came in, but they were never shortlisted for the AFOX scholars, for the AFOX scholarship. But once you get in, so once you have an admission, they will review those applications, and then you'll be shortlisted for the AFOX scholarship. Previously, what we did was to write different essays, but now they will do these interviews where they would want to hear from you.
okay.
It's this one-on-one individuals, and then they have the questions, one-on-one conversation.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I would think at this stage the MLF should really take the major priority. Like I would think what the MLF is asking for should really be your primary objective, getting into the program. Yeah, those are my own 2 cents, that don't have to be taken, but I think like really, the major brunt should be on like getting into the MLF. Well,
I think mention something about Africa and where you come from for you to be shortlisted for the AFOX scholarship for sure, because they're very much interested in this, having scholars from Africa who can go and do XXX, depends on the program as well. Try to also see people who added the AFOX scholarship. I mean, we usually write our profiles and what people are interested in doing and try to borrow from there.
Yeah.
And
I think there was an AFOX scholar in the MLF, wasn't there?
Yes,
last year, right?
There's, there's even one who got the Oxbridge. It's the Oxford Cambridge Society Scholarship from Kenya. So I would say I would go even to the department that you're applying to and see what people are doing. Have they had African scholars? What have they done? Go to Google Scholar, see people that have done research on, the program that you're doing. Are there people who have done something from Oxford in Africa in that department? And try to also mention something around that. But for you to be shortlisted for the AFOX, try to mention something about African continent as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
All right. Thank you
I
so
agree.
much.
Sorry, so just one more thing. I think just in spirit of concrete, also go through the AFOX website and see who did the MLF and try to reach them on LinkedIn and ask them how they wrote theirs as well. I think that would also be a helpful endeavor if you can reach them. Yeah.
All right, thanks both.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Laureen. Just one very last one. Wouldn't be fair if we just dropped off without Olajesutofunmi. I really hope I pronounced your name well, but we could have your very last question, then wrap up our session because it has gone over with probably, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. And yeah, so over to you.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Kelechi and Edinah, for this wonderful session, and your answers have been quite comprehensive and insightful. So, my question is, how do we balance ambition and feasibility in the personal statement? Because obviously, because the course I'm applying to international health and tropical medicine, they have, okay, what is your vision for public health? And AFOX too wants to see that you are able to have ambitious projects. And last week, Patricia mentioned that it's not just about ambition, it also has to be feasible. So I'm just trying to gauge your insight on doing that.
Um, yeah, just as a caveat, I always think it's important to mention caveats. Those prompts in the Masters in International Tropical Medicine were instituted only last year, right? And I got in last couple of years. So that's just the caveat. So anything I'm giving you is not based on what I wrote to get into, because it was a different prompt in my year. So just putting that out there first and foremost. But yeah, so you said balancing feasibility and ambition. Yeah, I think there's no one easy answer to that. It would very much depend on your previous experiences, right? Because the masters is going to give you a boost, that's for sure. But it's not going to be like I mean, you're not going to finish masters and become the Minister of Health in Nigeria. You get my point. So a lot of it depends on what your previous experience and what exactly do you think the masters is going to give you. So just to be maybe more practical, let's say you have experience in maternal and child health in Nigeria, right? And your previous experience has been, let's say, at the state level. So maybe you've been involved in a lot of things at the state level. So now, after the masters, you hope to be more involved at the regional or the national level. And then the next question is, at the national level, in what capacity, right? So maybe not the minister, but within this particular area, that the country is focusing on. Or it could even be a different role entirely at an even, at a different level. So my point is, like, feasibility, something is only feasible when someone can see the thread from what you've done or the positions you currently hold and what you hope to hold afterwards, right? It doesn't mean you should be too limited in your thinking, but there should be a clear link, either in terms of like the skill that you've been in and the skill you want to be after, or a change in direction. Maybe the masters will even help you pivot to a different direction. So, I mean, as long as it's not too outlandish and it clearly leads on from your previous masters or your previous experiences, then you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
I would also say develop an outline based on what they are asking. In each outline, highlight, as we said, you'll go through a process of writing. highlight what you want to write, just put everything, even if it's rubbish at that moment, and then you keep updating and refining your draft. And someone who's going to review, and often we have more than one reviewer. I think I had like 4 or 5 people reviewing my application. So these people would also help you refine your application process as well. And, just to talk about, how do I write these 300 words? Think about it. What do they want to see? Whom am I targeting? Have an outline. And then under each of these, it's a way I usually say, like, I have a paragraph for each, and then I outline and then I indicate. But then as the process keeps going, I try to make sure that my story is cohesive enough and everything makes sense. Do not be ambitious saying you're going to be a minister back in Nigeria when you actually know you're not going. You can be, but don't mention something that are too ambitious, but try to be rational as well. And really what would make sense, and someone would, there would be. I think the way I say is, when I do an application, can it be something that everybody will be interested to read? And they would feel proud of, we want to see this person. Imagine you're going to do a presentation somewhere. Can you do a very nice presentation where everybody will be curious and listen to your presentation? It's similar to, you need to do an application where everybody will be interested in reading your personal statement, and they'll be like, wow, I like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope Ola, just to soften me, you've been answered. And this is the very, very last question I promise, Kelechi and Edna. So it's from Itwa Kathia. It's a very long name, darling. Please just unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, thank you. My question is about how is the process going? Like, for example, we have to apply for the scholarship first, and then we are going to apply for the course. So we apply first for the course and then for the scholarship. Also, I want to know if, for example, you already have a master's degree. Are you allowed, for example, to apply for another master's degree, or you must not like mention it on the application and then just apply with your bachelor's degree? Thank you.
Yep. So really quickly, it depends on the scholarship. Some are before, like the roads, before the application to the school. Some are after the application to the school. Some are separate applications. Some, once you've applied to Oxford, like the Clarendon scholarship, you're automatically considered or not considered. So it really depends on the specific scholarship. Then in terms of the masters, I knew someone who had 3 masters. So nothing precludes you from applying to another master's, even if you have a master's. But it just has to make sense. Why are you doing this master's? What do you want to learn that's different, or how does that fit into where you want to end up in the next 5-10 years? Yep, that's it.
I think I don't want to add anything from what Kelechi has said, but I would say the process of drafting your essay and personal statement, you just don't take a week to draft a very good, document that you're going to submit to Oxford. It's quite emotionally draining as well. And once people review your work, they'll be coming in with so many, they will even trash your work and you will need to go back and read. So one thing is, do your research, check online, go to YouTube. People have their own experiences, try to copy ideas, go to your department, see what they're doing. Just do your research honestly and start to come up with ideas. And then when people review your work, they will also help you refine. So it's never a process of a day. I took 2 weeks, but I was drafting my application day in, day out until I did my submission. 2 weeks straight. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much to Kelechi and to Edna for your time and for sharing your insights. This has been amazing, and I believe we as the prospective students, next year we're going to be among the speakers, and other young people from Africa will be able to hear from our successes as well. So thank you for your time, and to our listeners, thank you as well. And over to you, Patricia.
Okay. Sorry for that echo. So it's been amazing having this session, and honestly, I want to thank you very much, Edna and Kelechi. This has been insightful. I'm pretty sure that people have been able to, understand how the process is, because we have had so many questions of how do I start in writing this personal statement? Why should I bring it, or how should I write it? And you have really taken your time to explain in depth using your personal experiences and your honesty. And I think that was the main reason of us having this, for people to, not come here with slides that, okay, this is the process of, writing a personal statement, but basically just using your personal experiences to make it as authentic and as natural as possible. And I really can't thank you enough for your time, for being here. God knows you had to pause your other schedules. I know, like Edna, you told me you were supposed to be here for just 1 hour, but you have been forced to stay all until now. And I really thank you very much, Kelechi, Edna. And of course, your amazing moderator. Dear humans, you should know our moderator was in the field and she just finished her field work and just jumped into this meeting. And I'm like, I just can't thank you enough for the sacrifice that you've made to make this happen. Because at some point I was like, wait, am I going to be the moderator today? Because I know the stories that you give me during the field that, because of the security reasons, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, Laureen, thank you very much for your time. And to everybody who has joined here today, we do not take this for granted. I know we would have had Kelechi, Edna, and Laureen, but if you guys were not here, then this would haven't happened at all. And for the questions that you have asked, for those who do not hesitate to ask, to open your mic and speak, trust me, somebody else probably had the same question, and you made it easier for them to also understand through your own questions. And thank you very much. So we will try again to bring in more of this series. I have shared some links in the WhatsApp group, and the first one is basically the link to our Accountability Buddies WhatsApp group, which was created for the purpose of assisting each other in applications, having an accountability buddy who will be checking upon you on, have you done this milestone, have you applied for this scholarship, or maybe just, you're stranded, you just send a message in the WhatsApp group saying, hey guys, I cannot do this. Is there a way that somebody has done it better? So it's more of like a community to support each other in this process, because it can be very overwhelming, and for other people it's the very first time. So please leverage on this group if you really need it. Then I've also shared the links for Kelechi and Edna if you'd want to engage further with them on their LinkedIn profiles, and of course our amazing moderator. Yeah, and I think that's it from me, and I really hope you have been able to get one or two from this session. And yeah, please, as we wrap up this session, stick behind for my music. But of course, feel free to leave at your own time. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's it. Let me put my music first before you guys leave. Yeah. Thank you.
Ver tú, Silvias Colmer. Terron tus cal pierden sol.